Alright, welcome back. Here is the demo on how to smooth out your walls once you've added about 3 or 4 layers of coils, and then how to taper in your walls with the next couple layers of coils that you're going to attach. You first are going to check the thickness and also the consistency of your clay. You want to make sure that the clay has stiffened up a little bit after your first 4 or 5 layers, and then you're going to use a couple different tools to make sure that you are scoring and smoothing the surface properly on the inside and the outside. You should be able to do this without too much trouble as long as you're carefully planning ahead. You want to make sure that you're using the wire brush first, and then, which I've already done, and then you're going to come back and use the metal rib and start to compress and smooth the clay on the inside. This is just a technique that you're going to use every 3 or 4 layers, so you get 3 or 4 of your coils completely compressed and smooth out before you move on to the next layers of coils. So I'm just turning, carefully the entire pot using my, my platform that I have there with the newspaper, and then I'm going to be able to spin the actual pitcher as I'm working to get it as symmetrical as possible. The wire brush is something you want to do right before you use the metal rib, and then you're just going to use your hands and your thumb to kind of help smooth out the final surface before you move on to the next layer of coils. Once you've done that and the clay is firmed up enough, it should be flexible, but not so flexible that it starts to flop over. So it should have some time to dry. You're going to come back and you're going to start making some new coils again. Make sure you have a bag ready for storage, and then start compressing your clay in your hand and just kind of wrap your fingers around the clay until you start to make a coil in your hand, constantly rotating it and working from the center out to the edges so that you can create a nice, consistent, even coil before you ever put it on the table. Now, make sure you hydrate it. Make sure you do this every time you're rolling out a coil, and then if you run into a problem where it's flat like that, I want you to twist the coil in opposite directions on the ends and create that spiral kind of effect. That's going to eliminate some of the flat areas, and it's going to let the clay roll again in a nice round form, and then you're going to continue to roll out the coil and stretch out the clay from the center out to the edges, and then keep hydrating and making sure the coil doesn't dry out as you're rolling it out. Try to use the entire hand. Make sure that you're using the entire length of your hand as you roll, and then continue to stretch to a point where you feel like it's the right thickness. And we want to make sure that we're looking around the thickness of maybe our pinky, or maybe a little bit thicker than that as well. So make sure that you are always measuring it and testing things out and seeing if it's at the right thickness. Once you have it made, you're ready to go ahead and make a couple more if you want, or just go ahead straight on to the surface like this one. Now I'm measuring this ring to be a little bit smaller than the previous layer, and that's very important to make sure that it's kind of resting on just on the inside edge to create that curve that I'm looking for, and trying to make sure that the walls of my pitcher start to go in a little bit. Make sure you measure and then you wire cut, being careful not to cut through the bottom or the next layer below, and then start making sure that you measure out things properly that way too. Go ahead and score both ends and get your slip, and just a little bit of slip to help glue the two ends together. Make sure that you're compressing the clay but not crushing your coil before you put it back onto the actual pot. You want to make sure that the coil is as consistent as possible before you start to score and slip it onto the actual surface of the previous layer. Take your wire brush and score really well, nice and deep lines into the clay on both parts, almost kind of in a crisscross pattern, and then you're going to dab on the slip. Make sure you build up a layer of slip all the way around the surface before you add your new layer, or your new ring, your new coil ring. Now I'm going to be very deliberate about the way that I push down on this coil, because I want it to tilt in. So I want to make sure that my hand and my thumb are doing the exact same thing. I'm kind of showing you guys right there. I want that angle to happen as I'm pushing the clay down, So I'm going to position my thumb on my left hand a little bit more sloped inward. So it's not completely straight up and down, it's a little bit sloped inward towards the middle. And then I'm supporting it with my right hand, I'm supporting it with my thumb right below so that the coil doesn't slide out and change the overall shape too much. I want it to be a subtle kind of bend at that transition, and now I'm starting to make sure that that coil is really bonded to the surface of the previous layer. So this is going to take a little bit of practice, making sure that your hand position is the same every time, and just keep turning and rotating your actual pitcher on the table, and then keep your hands in the same spot as much as possible. So every time I do this, I'm pushing a little bit more, and I'm starting to create that slope that I'm looking for on the transition from going out. Now I'm going back in, and I want to keep that happening for the next layer. So this is a repeated process. You want to keep doing this for at least 3, maybe 4 layers, depending on what your pitcher looks like, what your transitions are going to look like. We've talked about it before, where we have about 1/3 of the height to be around 3 inches tall, and then another 1/3 to get to 6 inches, and then another 1/3 to get to 9 inches, which is our minimum height that we're looking for. So I'm repeating the process of scoring and slipping. My coil is ready to be attached. Just want to make sure the layer is thick enough with the slip, and then I'm going to do the same technique where I'm going to keep my thumb kind of angled in. Once it's positioned in the right spot, I want to keep my thumb angled in and then support with my thumb underneath so that it doesn't slide out from underneath and ruin the shape that I'm looking for. So I'm just going to keep turning, probably get 3 or 4 compressions in, pressing down and at an angle inward so that the coil starts to slope in and starts to angle too. Make sure you're consistent with this pressure. Make sure that you're consistent with supporting it from underneath. So it's hard to kind of see exactly what I'm doing there, but the left thumb is just above the right thumb, and my left thumb is tilted, and I'm kind of compressing my thumbs together as I move around the wall. So it starts to slope in, and it continues to do that for the next couple layers as I'm working. So now I'm just kind of looking at what that transition looks like, what the shoulder might look like for the actual pitcher, and then I'm going to start letting the slip maybe dry out just a little bit more, because it's a little bit difficult to get the whole coil to compress properly when the slip is just fresh and on there. You might need to take some time to let the slip thicken up and then start to blend a little bit more and a little bit more until you have a nice sealed, consistent seam. Once you're done on the outside, then I'm going to make sure that I kind of keep my thumb at an angled position and start to smooth out and smear the clay down on the inside as well. Eventually, maybe 3 layers in, maybe 4, I'll start thinking about getting the wire brush on the inside and starting to scrape the entire surface down after the walls have been compressed properly. So just take your time. Make sure that you're using a consistent, even pressure. You don't want to make any real thin spots or thick spots with your coil. So you're not pressing very hard. I just want to make sure that I'm consistent and keeping that direction going the same way each time so that I can actually see the wall starting to taper in. And then once you've got to that point, then you can start using the wire brush and start scraping the outside, and then use the metal rib as well to start smoothing things out. All right, good luck.